Hi, welcome. This is Carolina Journal's live stream coverage of the midterm 2022 election night returns. We're really excited. We've been planning this for quite a while. We've been really covering. We appreciate all of you tagging along with us as we covered this midterm election. My name is Donna King. I'm the editor-in-chief, and we're going to be bringing returns to you all evening right here on Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and, of course, our Facebook page. And we'll have all the returns for you as they come in. And we're going to be giving you some really expert analysis from the folks at the John Locke Foundation. We've got some amazing talent in our group here, and they're going to be bringing us all of this in-depth analysis that we've been bringing you on carolinajournal.com. You'll see it all right here tonight. And Mitch, you're joining us here too with your expert analysis.
Well, I don't know if it'll be expert, but it'll certainly be analysis. I'm Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst at the John Locke Foundation, and happy to be a part of this. Really looking forward to this because we certainly have assembled such a great team, and that's a good chance to turn it over now to the leader of our team to talk about what she thinks we're going to be hearing about tonight.
Well, I'm Amy Cook. I'm the CEO of the John Locke Foundation and publisher of Carolina Journal. And like Mitch and Donna, absolutely thrilled to be able to bring this to all of you. And we aren't just going to be looking at North Carolina. Of course, most of the analysis will come from North Carolina, but it's also going to be, where does North Carolina fit in the entire national political ecosystem? What is the impact of what happens in North Carolina on some other races throughout the country? And then think about this. What happens in North Carolina? Sure. Is that going to be, some kind of signal to what we can expect in the rest of the country? So not only are we going to be looking at other races, but other races will be looking at us.
Sure, and of course North Carolina has a big race, something we've been watching nationwide and of course intensely here, the Senate race between Congressman Ted Budd for the Republicans running to replace Senator Richard Burr, and of course the Democrats have nominated former Supreme Court Chief Justice Sherry Beasley running for the Democrats there. So that race has been neck and neck throughout this season. In the last few weeks, it seems like Republican Ted Budd has started to pull ahead a little bit, and some of it really might be messaging. So we'll be watching that really closely, of course, because it could play a critical role in who the balance of power on Capitol Hill. And then, of course, here, North Carolina's legislature, our North Carolina General Assembly, we all have been really, really engaged with what's been going on there in some of these races. And that's something you may not see anywhere else, or may not see very much of anywhere else. We're in deep on those races. And of course, our now 14 congressional seats. We now have, one more. We've been watching those really closely, and there's some big races, particularly in, I guess, 13. What other races are you going to be watching?
The 13th is the clear toss-up race. It was designed as a toss-up district when that congressional map was drawn by judges, not by legislators.
Right.
But also the first district has turned out to be a pretty tight one where you have Don Davis and Sandy Smith running for what is an open seat. And then there's even some sense that perhaps the 6th district, where you have Kathy Manning as an incumbent, that one might be competitive. If it's a very good night for Republicans, that one could be in play. But certainly the 1st and the 13th.
Absolutely. What are you going to be watching nationwide?
So can I feed off one thing off that, then I'll talk about it nationwide. So first of all, I think also too, if it's a good night overall, we'll also be watching, and this is the beauty of being here with us, Carolina Journal, we're going to be looking at local school board races too.
Yeah.
Think about that. So if it's a good night everywhere, some of that's going to trickle down to some of those conservative candidates. When I say a good night, it's a good night for Republicans. It will trickle down to some of those school board races. And one of the projects that we did here at the Locke Foundation was the ballot roll-off project, which we'll hear from Donald Bryson, our president, shortly, and he can talk more about that. We encourage everybody to finish your ballot. Go vote. Don't just vote for the top of the ticket sexy races. Finish your ballot, because the races that are closest to you are the ones that have some of the biggest impact on your budget. That's where really the rubber meets the road. Nationally, I'll tell you what, there are a couple of things. One is what Mark Elias and Eric Holder did on redistricting. I think with the way Biden is so wildly unpopular, that this could have been a much bigger year for Republicans had that redistricting project not been as successful as it was, not just in North Carolina, redrawing the maps that Mitch alluded to, where judges redrew the maps, but they brought something like 72 cases in 26 different states and redrew maps in a number of states that they were able to get more beneficial to Democrats than Republicans. So looking for that. Also, looking for split tickets possibly throughout, and then some of those sleeper races.
Sure.
You all know I'm from Colorado. I'm going to be keeping an eye on Joe O'Dea, who was one of the. Nobody gave him a chance. He's narrowed the margin for U.S. Senate between him and Michael Bennet, who's the incumbent. And I will throw one more thing out there, and it's the candidates who the Democrats put something like $50 million into getting them elected in primaries because they thought they would be easier to defeat. Carrie Lake for governor of Arizona.
Sure.
She's one that Democrats who put all that money into getting Trump Republicans through the primary, that could very well end up being. She's predicted to be the governor of Arizona.
Sure.
So I'm wondering how much Democrats are wondering how much money did we spend and did we spend it wisely?
Right. She's really emerged as a
Oh.
rock star of this.
Yep.
Let's bring in Donald Bryson in just a minute. Donald Bryson is the president of the John Locke Foundation. He's been in charge of doing a lot of what we do here in terms of finding out what North Carolinians really think. What's important to them? What are they focused on when they go head to the ballot box? Donald, join us here. I'm looking forward to hearing what you say about this because we've really examined whether these things are important. Inflation, the economy, abortion. What are you finding that North Carolinians find is the most important to them when they head into the polling places this time?
The economy and inflation. That's not to say that abortion isn't an important issue. I think any poll in America will find that it's an important issue, but has been an important issue since 1972 and actually before 1972, right? But the question is, when people go into the ballot box, what is important to them right now? And I've been saying, anybody who's been watching the poll presentations here at the John Locke Foundation since earlier this year, I've been saying, look, inflation's not going away. It's going to be a big issue. And even if you go back to our June poll, 88.4% of voters in that poll said that inflation was of huge importance. Feedback. Was of huge importance to them, and as we have continued on into our October poll, it is still of huge importance to voters, and it has outweighed, I think we might see that, but at least in our last poll, it has outweighed the issue of abortion.
Sure. So, we have a graphic ready for you that has the latest poll numbers for that big Senate race we were just talking about.
Right.
Congressman Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley. What's happened in the last couple of weeks that you're seeing in some of the poll numbers?
Sure. So right out of the spring after the North Carolina primary, we saw that Congressman Budd had a very small lead in May and then into June, and then over the summer something happened. Probably the Supreme Court decision with Dobbs, and then in our September and our August and September polls, they were tied, dead even. Beasley and Budd were. Of course, there are two other candidates in that race as well. But then, as other polls have shown, our poll showed people started breaking for Ted Budd. There was a 4% swing in moderates. There was, I think, an 11% swing, or about a 10% swing in unaffiliated voters for Ted Budd. Women started breaking more for Ted Budd. A lot of Republican voters, traditional Republican voters that had been undecided in our earlier polls, were sort of coming home to roost. And our latest poll in late October, our Civitas poll here at the John Locke Foundation, showed Ted Budd up by 4 points. Polls that have come out since then, such as from East Carolina University and Trafalgar, The Hill put out a poll as well, are now showing Budd up by 5 to 6 points.
Good. Well, so tell me, what else are you going to be watching for this evening? What are some of the big races you're watching?
Well, it's not a big race, actually. It's a very small race. This is the thing that I'm hyper-focused on. There are 5 counties in North Carolina, and we didn't poll this, but I really wanted to. There are 5 counties in North Carolina that are going to have sales tax referendums going on. Now, remember, these are sales tax referendums to increase their county sales tax at a time when inflation is very, very high. My prediction is that if these sales tax referendums, if any of them, particularly the two large ones in Wayne County, that's around Goldsboro, and New Hanover County around Wilmington, are defeated by 60+%, then people are really voting with their feet, right? Or voting with their pocketbook, thinking about their pocketbook. And this could be a big night for Republicans and a bad night for Democrats. You know, the issue of abortion, when you ask people, is it important to them, which we did in our last poll, that issue breaks both ways, right? That's a 50-50 issue in America. It's a 50-50 issue in North Carolina. But when you ask people if inflation and food prices are an important issue to them, you know, that goes one way. Nobody is pro-inflation. There are people that are pro-abortion, there are people that are pro-life, but no one is pro-inflation. And so I think that will be the prevailing thing. But I'm going to watch those two of those counties. There are 5 counties, but the two that I'm going to be watching are Wayne County and New Hanover County, and how those sales tax referendums go.
Donald, it's interesting, of course, because we're talking about politics, especially tonight, but politics drives policy. And you mentioned the bond votes. One of the reasons why, the bond votes and also the tax votes, one of the reasons why these tax votes are taking place now is that change in policy from the General Assembly, where they said no longer can these counties put up these tax votes on these bizarre election days when the only people voting are the people who work for government who know when the election is. If you're going to have one of these tax votes, it needs to be on a major election date. And so they have to have these votes when everyone's heading to the polls.
Right. It's a much more democratic part or way of presenting that, you know, instead of having it, and this isn't an exaggeration, on, you know, the third Tuesday in July of a non-election year, which, you know, things like that had been prone to happen all throughout North Carolina. This is a much better way of presenting it to the voters. These sales tax referendums and bond referendums, which I think you're going to cover later in this broadcast, are acts of direct democracy. And so when I hear people saying, you know, democracy is on the ballot, you know, yes, it literally is on the ballot, but in a very positive and direct way, not in the way that it is in danger.
Great, great. Amy, do you have any questions for Donald? Because we've been talking a lot about all of these issues.
Yeah. Donald, one of the things I mentioned earlier, and you really spearheaded this, we talked about some of those local ballot issues, those bond measures. You spearheaded our ballot roll-off project, where we encourage everyone, it's nonpartisan, we encourage every voter to finish your ballot. And that's really part of that when you talk about looking at some of those local bond measures. That's specific to what the ballot roll-off project was intended to do.
That's exactly right. You know, we're a nonpartisan 501c3 organization here at the John Locke Foundation. We focus on state-based policy, right? We want people to engage in public policy at the state and local level. I think that oftentimes, and we definitely find this, we're sort of victims of, I'll call it the Fox News syndrome, right? People go home at night, they turn on the news, they turn on Fox News, they turn on, you know, bless their hearts, MSNBC or CNN or something like that. And it's all about, you know, how many steps did Joe Biden have to take to get out of Marine One today, or what sort of cream cheese did Donald Trump put on his bagel this morning? And let's look at 3 talking heads to learn about the political implications. But there are a lot of really important things that happen much closer to home, down on Jones Street in Raleigh at the state capitol, as well as, you know, at City Hall. And so we embarked on a statewide campaign of direct mail and phone calls and digital ads to, in a nonpartisan way, encourage people to complete their ballot. Don't just vote for Senate, don't just vote for Congress and then turn in your ballot. No, complete your ballot. Vote at all and civically engage at all levels of government. That includes these things like bond referendums, sales tax referendums. Vote for your, you know, soil and water conservation manager, your school board. These are all very important things, because I promise you the zoning laws that the county commission passed will impact you much more directly than anything that Congress is probably not going to do.
You know, and one of the things that you found, because this is what, the second year that you did it before when it was Civitas. Now we've done it as we've combined our capacities, Civitas and Locke, to be the Locke Foundation. It actually had an impact. Found that the percentage of roll-up, percentage of voters are actually, we're seeing more and more of them completing their ballot all the way down.
Right. The percentage of people of, you know, of overall votes cast compared to how many votes were cast for like state Supreme Court or district attorney or attorney general, things like that, we definitely did see that number go down in a very positive way. We want fewer and fewer people to have not completed their ballot. We want more people to complete their ballot, and that's what we're seeing. We had positive results with the areas that we targeted in 2020. We think we're going to see that again this year. We're very hopeful. We'll see how it goes, but I can't stress how important it is for people to not sleep on these local races, not sleep on these state races, because honestly, Washington, D.C. doesn't do very much. But county commissions and the General Assembly, to the point that Mitch made earlier about how they just changed the balloting laws, will impact people much quicker. But we put this out in a variety of ways. Even Donna wrote a great column in Carolina Journal about how this year's election is not just about who is in control of Capitol Hill. It's about a lot more than that.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much, Donald Bryson, president of the John Locke Foundation. Great insight, as always. Thanks for joining us.
One thing we should probably mention, because people who have been tuning in may say, well, how much longer do people have to vote? It's not much longer. The polls close in North Carolina at 7:30, except in a handful of precincts.
Right. So tell me more about that, because we had some breaking news here on CarolinaJournal.com that talked about an emergency meeting that the State Board of Elections had this afternoon to extend that deadline.
Anytime a polling location doesn't open at 6:30 when it's supposed to, there is a chance that polls will be open a little bit longer, so that people who did not get a chance to vote at the beginning will have a little bit chance at the end of the day.
Right.
And so we saw out of the hundreds, perhaps thousands of polling locations across North Carolina, there were a handful that for one reason or another did not open on time. I think in one case it was because the custodial service wasn't there on time, or there was some sort of problem with a computer connection, or something happened.
Printers out of paper, whatever it is.
So in a handful of precincts, the State Board of Elections, in a unanimous vote this afternoon in an emergency meeting, decided that I believe it's just 3 precincts in 3 counties will have their polls stay open until 8:30. So in those counties, including Wilson County, which has a number of very close races, you won't see any results until after 8:30. But in 97 of the counties, the polls should be closing in a relatively few minutes, and then once that happens, they'll be able to start releasing numbers, which is good for all of us.
Sure. Well, something else that we've talked a lot about is there's been an increase in messaging, particularly from, I think, a lot of Democrat candidates worried about people being intimidated at the polls and, all of these other things. The State Board of Elections had a really interesting press conference yesterday that we were able to listen in on and ask some questions. And they said that so far we've got 2.1 million votes cast in that early voting period, and they're looking into about 15 complaints. They don't know to what degree they will be, have to be elevated or sent to DOJ or for whatever reason. But I think 15 complaints out of 2.1 million votes is actually pretty good. Karen Brinson Bell, the executive director over there, said that that's pretty much in line with what they saw in the primaries and in past elections. So I think that that's promising. It may have been a misguided argument, maybe to scare folks into making sure they turned out. I don't know.
And I will say, if you haven't read what Andy Jackson wrote, and admittedly it's a book, but we asked him to look into what actually happened in 2020 because everybody kept making it's rigged, it's stolen, it's there were it wasn't fair, and Civitas at the Civitas poll, we actually found that something like 47% of likely North Carolina voters were afraid that 2022 wouldn't be a free and fair election. So we had Andy Jackson do a deep dive into what happened in North Carolina in 2020. And it's a book. I'll be the first one to tell you it is a book, but it is worth reading if you really want to know about what issues arose out of the 2020 election. And he's got some great suggestions for how to fix that. It's not just it was pretty good overall.
amazing.
It was.
is.
It really
is.
was.
Uh-huh.
But there were some areas where, you know, legitimately people should be concerned. The influence of Mark Zuckerberg and some others on money in the system. Sure. But I would highly recommend reading Andy Jackson's What Happened in 2020. If you want to know what the issues are in North Carolina, and then how they can be fixed. And the legislature has already taken some steps and worked with Andy on that.
Sure. So where can people get that if they want?
Go to johnlocke.org.
Yeah, John Locke.
And it's under Andy's center, which is the Civitas Center for Public Integrity, which does a lot of great work. We'll be hearing from Andy a little bit later in this broadcast.
Sure.
I guess it's the
live stream.
internet cast,
Yeah.
live stream,
Live stream,
not a
yeah,
broadcast.
sure.
And also from his colleague Jim Sterling, who
Yeah.
will be coming up a little bit later talking
Sure.
about some other interesting work that the Civitas Center's been doing.
It really is. I've enjoyed working with them throughout this process. That love for numbers is just amazing to me. But that writing really is important because there's a lot of things that I've read, a lot of rumors, seen a lot of posts on social
Right.
media, and he clarifies it and says, okay, here's the deal. Here's what really happened. Now, speaking of love of numbers, another
And
young
graphics.
and graphics, another young woman that has amazed me throughout our process. If you ever see, these great social media posts and reels and all these fantastic things that Carolina Journal and the John Locke Foundation have been putting out there, you know of Brene Goforth.
You could say the face behind, but
Yeah.
you usually see the face because she's
Yeah,
right
you
there in
do.
front of the
You
video.
do.
I call her our first social media influencer.
Absolutely. Brene, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Good. Now, you, of course, in true Brene style, have loaded us up with a bunch of good data, good graphics. I got some of them here to share with everybody. Tell me what we're looking at here. What are you seeing throughout this election cycle that surprised you, or, what tells you that deep dive into what North Carolinians are thinking about?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I'm going to show you guys is some Google Trends data. So everyone can find this kind of information by themselves. You go to Google Trends and you can type in whatever you want, and you can find out based on geographic area what's trending, what's not, and you can compare different items. So one of the things that I've done here for you guys is I have done 90 days of Google search data for abortion and 90 days worth of Google search data for the search term inflation. So we can take a look at the data and see that North Carolinians are kind of split. They're split pretty closely there. But overall, inflation is a more popular search amongst North Carolinians, and abortion is most popular in eastern North Carolina. When we move on to our second slide here to look further into what the actual data says, what people are actually searching, we can see for abortion, most of the time it's searches for abortion services, abortion pill, abortion clinic, those kinds of things, right? So that's one of the things that is skewing the data. It's not people looking for abortion news, right? They're searching for an actual service. And when we look at the inflation data, the first thing is the Inflation Reduction Act, interestingly enough. But when you move further down, you see things like inflation calculator. People are really trying to figure out how this is going to affect their wallet, and that might be influencing them to vote, but it's very close. This is closer than we see a lot of the polling data for interest in these topics. So that kind of gives us an idea of North Carolinians in particular, what's on the forefront of their mind.
That's so interesting.
I want to ask Brene the question of ignorance here. As I was looking at those graphics, I'm thinking to myself, this is kind of like a Rorschach test, or maybe the map of Russia or something. Tell us what those actual plots are showing us.
Absolutely. So we've got little sects of metro data. So if we look back at it, you're going to see things like eastern North Carolina goes a little bit into South Carolina, maybe a little bit into Georgia in that tri-state area. Then you've got a sect there for Charlotte and some of the more northern mountains there. And we've got everything from Wake County and Durham put together with northern North Carolina to some of our eastern coastal counties. So it's really interesting to see by metro. You can break it down by city, all these kind of things, but you can see where things are more popular, where they're less popular. It's a very interesting interactive tool. And actually next for you, I have Bud and Beasley, right? Let's see how popular they are on the internet. So on our next slide here, you can see that it's been trending upwards steadily in the past 90 days. But in the actual geographic data, it's very divided, right? So we've got areas of Charlotte and areas of the Triad that are looking for Ted Budd more, and then you've got areas of Western North Carolina, you've got areas in Wake County, things like that, Durham, that are searching for Sherry Beasley. But overall, Ted Budd is beating it out. He is more in the front focus of people's minds, as it appears through this data, as just one measure of that. So it's very, very interesting. You can see that the numbers are very closely divided,
Sure.
but it does bode well for Budd, right?
Right, right. That is really interesting to me that you can see it at that granular level.
Right, and Charlotte kind of surprises me.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
It does.
I mean, but you know, I think we're going to find more than one surprise tonight.
Yeah, I think so too. One of the races that we're going to be watching really closely, I'm sure everybody is the Bo Hines Wiley Nickel race. We were just talking about it a few minutes ago out in Congressional District 13. Brene, you have a little bit of data on that race too for us.
Yeah, I do. So what I've taken here this time is just in the Wake County, Durham kind of area, and I've mapped it out by city, right? So in the northern kind of Wake County area, Raleigh, Wake Forest, you've got Congressional District 2, and then below that, right, you've got this Congressional District 4, the Bo Hines Wiley Nickel race. So when you take a look at this data, you can see that Bo Hines is beating out Wiley Nickel by quite a little margin there. And actually in the areas where Wiley Nickel is the most popular, it's actually not in his district. It's in District 2. It's Wake Forest. It's Raleigh. And Raleigh's cut down right at the bottom into his district. So when you look at things more like Sanford and those kinds of areas, it's pretty much all Bo Hines. So, you know, he's more popular in the on the forefront of people's minds. People want to know more about him.
Sure.
Maybe Wiley's doing a better job of getting out his information to them without having to Google it, but I don't think that's the case. I think that people are more interested in what they're hearing about Bo Hines, and he seems to be beating out Wiley in that case.
And that's one of the interesting things, Brene, about a race like this where you are having to buy ad time in the triangle media market, but the district is only a portion of that. I mean, it's it's the southern part of Wake County and then all of Johnston and parts of Harnett and Lee. So a lot of the people who are seeing these ads either for or against Wiley Nickel, for or against Bo Hines, are not voting in that district. I went to the polls today. They're not on my ballot. I was in the race between Deborah Ross and Christine Valverde.
Right.
And so it was lost on me because I couldn't cast a ballot for either one of them. And probably a lot of the people who are doing those searches that you're talking about have seen these ads and thought, well, I want to learn more. And then it didn't have anything to do with their race.
Very interesting.
And it could also be, too, that people know Wiley Nickel from his time at the legislature. And Bo Hines, if they know him, then maybe they know the family name or they know him from NC State football and wondering, what is this connection now?
Sure.
Could be just people he's young, too.
Yeah.
And people trying to figure out who he is.
Sure, and well, and that Trump endorsement certainly put his name, elevated his name in this race, whether you like it or not.
Right.
You know, one of the things you just mentioned were all the ads, Brene. Tell me a little bit about what you saw trending in social media with ads, because I'm old, so to me, I'm watching television ads. The social media ads just aren't hitting me as hard as they probably are with you and your age.
Right. So one of the things that I went into was the Facebook ads library. So this is also a public resource if you want to dig into kind of what PACs are spending what money where. This is definitely a great place to go. The Facebook ads library tells you all the information from how much money they're spending on the ads to where they're placing the ads. And it shows you the ads themselves and all of the different iterations. Now what I've done here is I have compared the North Carolina Democratic Party's Facebook ads with the North Carolina Republican Party's Facebook ads. I have to say, as a person who runs ads on social media, the Democratic Party's choice to use stock images and kind of basic text is not particularly eye-catching or appealing. You can see that part of their message there is to get out the vote in Spanish-speaking communities. But when you take a look at the Republican Party's ads, they are going hard with really vibrant language. You can see radicalist social democrats is what they're going with. You see the Budd or that ads against Beasley that say things like dangerously liberal, right? They're going with this kind of fear messaging. That's what we're seeing come out of the NCGOP in their ads. And it could be an effective message, but either way, it's interesting to see that there's been a lot more attack ads this season than I've seen in quite a long time. So people are spending their money to go against their opponent more than they are to promote themselves, seemingly. And that's true as an attack case for both sides. I see that quite often. Instead of boosting your own name recognition, to take the opportunity to drag your opponent through the mud. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We'll see if it pays off this year.
And I have to note right now it is 7:30, so for most of us, polls are closing right now. If you are in line, you still are able to vote as the polls close. So polls should be closing if they aren't closed where you are right now. Except in those 3 precincts in the 3 counties with that the polls will go until 8:30. But Brene, I have to ask you, because you are a person who follows social media very closely, if we turn the clock back to, say, 2008 and even really 2012, there was a lot of criticism that Republicans just didn't get it in the way that Democrats did in terms of dealing with new technology and reaching people that way.
Right.
Based on what you said, it sounds like maybe Republicans are on a better footing on that front and maybe more competitive with Democrats in keeping up with the times.
Sure.
Well, there is something there is a common thing in the internet zeitgeist of the left can't meme. And so that's one of the things that we're kind of seeing in these ads is the left is playing it pretty safe, perhaps a little corporate with the ads, and the Republican Party is taking risks that they might not have in the past. I've seen some very interesting ads, but I think that one of the things that you have to do if you're going to be posting digital ads is you have to make them eye-catching, because this is such an expensive time of year to put out ads. There's a lot of fighting for eyeballs, and one of the amazing things that you get in digital advertising that you don't get in a lot of other mediums is the ability to target pretty close to what you're looking for. So you really want to be spending those dollars effectively, because you have an opportunity that a billboard doesn't get you, and that's to get age demographics correct and to exclude people who aren't of voting age. This is a way to really spend your dollar effectively, and unfortunately it seems like sometimes people are wasting money by targeting too broadly or making their message not targeted enough in the way that new age social media marketing can allow you to do.
Very interesting. I'm always fascinated by what she brings us, particularly to our meetings. She can tell us exactly what readers are checking out, how long they're looking at it, what pictures we need to be posting. I'm just fascinated by this process. It's like magic to me.
And if you haven't seen Brene on TikTok or anything, you literally have to see her. She is, I'm telling you, our first social media influencer.
Absolutely.
I was bragging about her to some of my kids. I'm like, look how good she is.
Right. Brene, go forth. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us here on this live stream covering the elections, and you're really laying out the groundwork for what we're going to be seeing a lot more of. Is there anything in particular you're going to be watching for?
So I'm going to be watching for the outcomes of the not the sports betting, but political sports betting.
Sure,
right?
sure.
I'm going to be looking for those. We've seen some really interesting stuff coming from there, predicting races that other people would otherwise not be willing to do. So I'm going to see how closely those odds can predict the races.
Yeah, absolutely. That is interesting. Teresa Opeka did a story on that. You'll find it on CarolinaJournal.com that says that in the end, what are the odds makers saying? Not necessarily the pollsters.
Right. Where are they putting their money?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And Teresa's over there shaking her head yes.
Yes.
I can see her in the background.
Everybody's working here.
We're in the Carolina Journal newsroom where everyone is working right now.
Yes. And yes, so keep in touch with us there at CarolinaJournal.com. David Bass is going to be keeping you updated on our website there. And of course, everybody's going to be writing and joining us throughout the time here until about 11 o'clock. Maybe we'll go later. Who knows? I don't even know anymore. But Brene, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us here. And we're going to keep track of what you're going to be watching for sure.
of course, it's going to be a while before we see some numbers because polls
Sure.
have just closed in most places or are about to close if people are still in line, except for a handful of precincts where the polls will remain open till 8:30. But our good friend
Of course.
and woodshed columnist Dallas Woodhouse is
Yes.
already contacting us
Yes.
with information. and
I
he
think we're going to
says-
be getting texts
Uh,
throughout.
I'm
from
guessing
Dallas.
so, and he says
Yeah,
that
us and everybody else, I'm sure.
that it appears that Republican-heavy Johnston County is turning out pretty heavily, and perhaps even more so than Southern Wake County,
Wow.
which in that 13th district
Wow.
would be good news
Yeah.
for Bo Hines and perhaps bad news for Wiley Nickel. He also says it appears that the turnout in Guilford County might be down considerably, which
Oh.
would be of interest, of course, in that 6th district congressional race and
Which
some
is-
others of importance as
So
well.
that's Kathy Manning?
Kathy Manning,
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
so
So we'll have to watch to see if that actually holds true. But if it does, you can thank
Sure.
Dallas Woodhouse for
Right.
telling us right at about 7:30.
Sure. Well, that Manning race really is interesting because when we went through this redistricting process and all those maps and all
Right.
that was drawn to be a safe district for her. And Castelli
Yes.
he is really giving them a run for their money over there.
because didn't she originally say she wasn't going to run on the first set of maps?
I think
Under
that's what
the
it was.
first set
Yeah.
of maps, I think she said, I could be wrong
Right.
on that. Somebody will tell me.
Right.
That's the beauty of
Here, Dallas will text you in just a minute. Yeah.
Dallas will let me know. I think she originally said she wasn't going to run in the
Sure.
first set of maps because she was like, I'm not going to run for that.
Right.
And then once the judge drawn maps
Right.
came out, she decided to run. So that's. I'll tell
Yeah.
you what. That is if Republicans pick that up. We can say Guam may have been the
Right.
first indicator.
Yeah. If you haven't seen that, Guam has maybe started the red wave.
Yeah,
We'll find
yeah,
out.
yeah. That's where the wave started.
Right,
And,
so-
and it just, it is not, yeah. I mean, it is crashing, but
Yeah.
Guam flipped.
Their congressional delegate, which is
And
a
it's a
non-voting,
non-voting,
but nonetheless,
But-
they're 10 hours ahead. Is that
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Sounds right.
Mm-hmm.
Dallas, by the way, says Amy is correct.
Okay, good.
You know, I like that, Dallas.
Right.
Good. Nicely done, Dallas.
Yes. And strangely, a little bit off subject, I was actually born in Guam. My dad was a Navy aviator, so naval aviator.
So the hometown.
The hometown coming through for the Republicans there. So yeah, it is interesting, and they've only got something like 50,000 registered voters. I mean, it's a small area, and their delegate flipped from a Democrat to Republican, but both were new candidates. So the old
So it was an open seat.
it was an open seat. The Democrat who's the incumbent actually dropped out of the race to go run for governor, but then he was beaten the primary. So now that we have the Guam news,
Guam, yeah.
That's right.
Well, first with the news from Guam. You
right.
heard it here first.
Right.
Flipped for the first time in 30 years.
30 years,
So that's,
1972.
that's a big one.
it is. But there's a lot of races here we can watch too.
Oh, yeah,
Well, as we wait for to
Right.
get results, we've got
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right. And of course, the big race in North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
the top of the ticket is the Bud Beasley race.
Sure.
And I would think that if you looked at this a couple of months ago, you would have
Yeah.
said this could be a really hotly contested race.
Sure.
It could go one way or the other. Now, of course, we still have not seen results. We don't
Right.
know which way
Right.
it's going to go. But everything has been pointing in recent weeks
Yeah.
more toward the race being a little bit better in the hands of Ted Budd, the Republican, which would be a hold for Republicans.
Right.
Republicans and Democrats have 50 seats apiece in the
Yeah.
U.S. Senate, which means Democrats get the tiebreaker because of the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Republicans need to gain a seat to get control, but that also means they need to hold seats like this one.
Sure.
And that had been something that was perhaps a bit of a point of contention back some months ago, but now it seems like a little bit better prospect that they'll hold this one.
Sure.
yeah, this was a seat that Democrats thought they could pick it up. They really did. And what has been surprising, and speaking of Dallas, I'm sure we all talked to him today, that no one came to campaign with Sherry Beasley, who, by the way, was pretty much anointed as the candidate. Jeff Jackson drops out.
Sure.
That race.
And later got a congressional district
Yeah,
with the
draw-
judge-drawn map.
Yeah, yeah.
The judge-drawn map.
Who
just
then
happened-
endorsed it? Yeah.
and gave him money.
Yeah.
But she was the candidate. She was the one who was supposed to be able to flip that seat from red to blue. And there was a time, I don't. We never had her up, but I think we had them tied.
Oh yeah, for a while they
Yeah,
were
they
tied.
were
Well, we did have her up. There was
maybe
one
back-
that was directly tied, and then the very next one, it was well within
In
the
the
margin of error, but
yeah,
it was like 0.3
that's true.
percentage points
Sure.
that she was
And
ahead.
by the way, if you want to see all of our polls, you can go to John Locke Foundation, johnlocke.org, and look under the polls. Actually, just scroll down in the page, you'll find them. But this was supposed to be a pickup for the Democrats because they thought they might lose other seats. They would be able to pick this one up, and at the end. Remember, Sherry Beasley and her campaign said a lot about we're not getting the support from the National Democrats. They're not coming. They're not spending money. I think Jim Sterling has some numbers on that for us.
Yes,
to share.
of course. He's got all the numbers. Yeah.
And speaking of Jim,
He's
we'll have him in just a few moments.
Yeah.
a
he's
savant
all ready
with
for us, I
numbers.
think,
But,
yeah.
they were supposed to be able to pick that up, but I was surprised that no big names came to campaign with her.
No, well, I think she had other plans every time Biden was in town, and so I think that was noted by all of the media in North Carolina that she did not appear with Biden on any of these campaign stops, but she did appear a lot with Governor Cooper. Last night she had a rally with him on stage, big hug, thanks for everything, because he of course endorsed her. But you're right, it does come down to money. Jim Sterling joins us now for the John Locke Foundation. He runs a fantastic website. If you get a chance to go look at it, he and Andy Jackson have a website called, they're working on carolinaelections.com with a vote tracker that it has been bookmarked on my computer at least for the last 3 or 4 months because that's where I'm getting everything. So Jim, tell me what you're seeing. What is that vote tracker doing for you? Tell me how you're updating it and where people can find the information that they're looking for.
So you can easily find it at the John Locke Foundation website under the Civitas Center. We have a link to it right there, be able to find it. That information is really telling us what the early voting is looking like, whether that be mail-in ballot, one-stop voting, all of that kind of data, and it goes into granular level. Like you can see the number of Democrats, the number of Republicans, the number of unaffiliated voters that are coming out and voting in these elections. Not only that, but the age range of that, which we've seen a lot more folks tend to be older this election than in prior elections.
Oh, interesting. Huh, that is interesting. Now, we were talking a few minutes ago about money, and particularly in the Bud and Beasley race. Tell me what you have found you've been tracking it at such a granular level. What's the big story coming out of this? Because money in these races, particularly when you look back at Tillis and Cunningham and now Beasley and Bud, what's the end story? What are we seeing here on election night?
Well, the simplest thing to say is Beasley is easily far and beyond the highest funded candidate to not run against Tom Tillis.
Sure.
The only two candidates in North Carolina history that beat her out in terms of fundraising are Roy Cooper and Cal Cunningham in the 2020 election. She's sitting with $34 million in receipts in this most recent report. This is by and far way above what Bud's sitting at $12 million. But what's keeping this competitive is with a lot of these outside groups spending. It seems Democrats have slowed down their funding in the last month, sitting at only about 26 million, I believe, with Beasley versus 60 plus million with Bud. It seems there's a lot less confidence in Beasley than there used to be. Around the time we started seeing our polling numbers start to decline again is when we started seeing a lot of drop off on that fundraising, or excuse me, those IE expenditures.
Sure. So we heard her campaign say a lot about, well, nationals aren't supporting us, they're not coming in. But then you hear that she's outraising him. Tell me the difference between the campaign raising and what an independent expenditure means.
So the estimation is about $1 to every $2 for campaign spending. An IE has to be priced at the normal market rate, whereas a campaign gets the lowest rate. So for cable TV, that's usually about 1.5, but on average for advertisement in general is about two times the money. So Beasley running an ad running ads for about $20 million would be the equivalent of, let's say, Club for Growth, for example, running $40 million in advertisements.
Wow.
Jim, I've got a question for you because you follow these numbers very closely, and we often see reports about one candidate has outraised the other, but that in this day and age seems to be something that's just an anachronism. You really can't just look at what the two candidates themselves are doing. You have to look at these outside expenditures in a race like this, or even in congressional races, that just comparing what one candidate has raised to the other candidate doesn't tell you even half of the story.
Right, and I can actually point to a little bit of a better way to look at this. If we look at the judicial elections here in North Carolina, for instance, Democrats have outraised Republicans in those races by about 2 times, but we look at the IE expenditures just from 2 different groups, we see a very, very different story. About $12 million has come in from Families First NC, which is a Democrat-aligned PAC, and that's a huge amount of money going into these judicial elections, whereas some of their, another Stop Liberal Judges, which is a Republican-held group, has about half that money in expenditure, or not even half that money in expenditures, about $3 million. It is just astronomical what we're seeing in terms of the differentiation between the IE expenditures for some of these candidates. And this goes down even further into state and local elections as well for some of these more urban areas.
Sure, sure.
One of the things, Jim, I'm curious about this. Just hearing these numbers, I have to believe that inflation has crept into political spending.
That's interesting.
These are wildly expensive races. I'm old enough to remember when this, of course, back in Colorado, when $6 million was monstrous for a gubernatorial race. Not so anymore. What are you seeing at the state legislative level? What do those numbers look like?
A lot of the numbers are increasing, especially in these close elections. We've been tracking a lot of state and Senate races, state House and Senate races. We have about 19 we're watching for the House, and I believe 9 for the Senate. It's going to be really interesting to see how the IEs impact that. We're going to have full data on that. State Board of Elections doesn't track it the same way as the FEC does. They allow for image files to come in, which sometimes take longer to process than the FEC, which has digitized files.
Okay.
Very interesting. Jim, thanks for joining us here. We've got tons of experts. I'm so excited to show you what we've got coming throughout this time. We've got our first kind of results starting to roll in. We'll have more about that coming up right now, but there's just not enough precincts reporting to really, start calling races or saying who's winning and who's not. But you can go ahead to the State Board of Elections website, ncsbe.gov, and they've got a results page there that's continually updating. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks
and
for having me.
we'll be, of course, coming back and bringing lots more folks over from the John Locke Foundation in just a minute.
So we get to take a break. How long?
All right, welcome back. I'm Donna King, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. You're watching our live stream, our coverage of election night, midterm elections 2022. We've got our folks all rotating in here and bringing our expertise to the table. Joining us now, of course, Ray Nostein, opinion editor of the Carolina Journal, and Teresa Opeka. She's our State House reporter, and we've all been covering this election, as a lot of you have been watching it pretty closely. So Ray, tell me what's striking you so far about this. We're still waiting for all of these results to come in, but it feels like things have changed a little bit in the last week or two.
Well, yeah, absolutely. The polling has shifted to the right, to the advantage of the Republicans and conservatives across the country. And one of the things that's really interesting to me, I was just looking at my phone before I came in here, but Miami-Dade County, the early returns, which is a heavily Democratic county in Florida, at least historically, is showing strong support for Republicans. So you're already seeing a lot of political alignment. We've talked about that at CJ, and you see that in the media a lot. But the realignment going on in this nation, where you have a lot of Hispanics who are now shifting over to the GOP, I think is really fascinating.
Sure.
And there's just been a lot of political realignment in general. So if those numbers hold up or stay on course in Miami-Dade County, it may signal kind of the red wave that might be emerging across the country tonight.
Sure. Hey, Ralph, if you'd put up, I've got the screen here for State Board of Elections. We've got the sort of very earliest returns coming in. Of course, it's certainly too early to call anything. We're probably going to be hearing more from the more urban areas first. They're closer, obviously, and they've got some of the technology that allows them to do it. Right now, Sherry Beasley has about a 58 to 40% lead on Congressman Ted Budd in that Senate race that we've been talking a lot about. Shannon Bray coming in with about 1%. Matthew Ho not quite registering a full percent yet, but we're going to be watching him because now remember Matthew Ho is the Green Party candidate that was added sort of at the last minute during the State Board of Elections situation when they were not going to add him, and then he sued, and then they added him, and so now there he is, got 4 candidates going. But of course, Teresa Opeka is our State House reporter. You're watching a lot of those state North Carolina General Assembly races. What are you going to be watching for this evening?
Just to see basically if the supermajority, we had our print edition out first, and it was basically nope, not going to happen. But the tide has turned. I think, like you said, kitchen table issues really came into play.
Right.
I think Democrats were really national and state level were focused on the abortion issue, which is an important issue. But when it all comes down to it, it's just kept getting worse and worse with the economy. I mean, you know, when you go to the grocery store, you go to the gas station, put gas in your car.
Absolutely.
So I think supermajority really is in play at this point.
It seems like it, and I didn't think it was going to be for a while, but it looks like now they're adding up some of those numbers, and the key races that I know I'm going to be watching for is House 19. That's the big one between Val Applewhite and Wesley Meredith. If you remember that one, that's the one where Kirk DeVere was the Democrat in that race, and then Cooper came in on that one and endorsed it.
Because DeVere wanted, he was actually, being nonpartisan, working with Republicans on the budget, and that kind of skewed, Cooper kind of got a little tiffed over that, and so he fell out of Cooper's good graces. So yeah, that's why DeVere he's not running.
Right, and
point.
so yeah, the Governor Cooper, then endorsed Val Applewhite. Actually appeared in a commercial for her, which is unusual. So we're being watching that one. He's running against Wesley Meredith, who's the Republican in that race. So that race may tell us the coattails that the governor had in these races. What else are you going to be watching for?
Well, I think the big race is the Senate race, right?
Sure.
I mean, you got Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley, and I think one of the questions is if Ted Budd, and I think most people expect him to win, if he wins tonight, will Democrats in North Carolina? I can say this. I used to work for a Democrat. But will they start pivoting more to the center? I think this is, we hear a lot in the media narratives about they're too far to the right, Republicans too far to the right. But will Democrats move to the center to be more competitive in North Carolina statewide? And I think that's an important issue that they need to think about if they end up losing this, because I don't know the exact, I know someone like Mitch will know this answer, but when's the last time in North Carolina a Democrat won a Senate race? Kay Hagan, I would assume.
Yeah, 2008, I guess, would be it. So one of the things I'm going to be watching for a lot, and because it looks like Johnson County turnout just southeast, I guess, of the Triangle area of the Capitol, their turnout has been pretty high so far, and some of it may be the school board races.
I think so.
The school board there is a big deal. Kelly Mann is our grassroots director. She's out there. School boards have been really popping up as a big part of the grassroots movement and what we're seeing in North Carolina. I think internally we've sort of called it the mad mom thing. Parents whose kids' schools were shut down during COVID have suddenly become really engaged, and they have decided that they want to see a change happen at the most local level in their school board. Kelly Mann joins us now. Kelly, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. Tell me what you're hearing from some of these grassroots groups, particularly when it comes to school boards.
Parents have been really engaged and more passionate than ever in the last 2 years, especially when their students were home and they were able to view what was being taught and the curriculum and some of the conversations that were going on via the Zoom lessons at home. And parents became passionate and concerned with the decisions that were being made and the lack of plans that were being made to get their children back in the classroom. In Wake County, many students weren't back in full time for a full year after schools were closed in March. So the passion, the concern, the desire to make change happen is really inspiring, and I'm excited to see parents taking more of a part in the school boards. In my district particularly, I've had the same school board leader since 2011. That school board member has been uncontested since 2011, and on the ballot we have 4 active candidates for that district. So that's a huge change, and it just is an example of people who want to see our schools be a student-centered education that parents can be included in, that parents can have a voice in, and we want to see our proficiencies improve. And I think that you're seeing that with the school board races in a lot of the major counties. And you mentioned Johnston County. There are some pretty heated candidates and elections going on there, as well as Wake County. Craven County has some really strong candidates, parents who are eager to see some change happen for their students. Charlotte-Mecklenburg County has a lot of parents that are really, really involved in the campaign. They may not be running, but they have candidates they're passionate about. They're the parents who typically have participated in booster clubs and PTA meetings and baking for events at school. They're running campaigns for the candidates, and it's really wonderful and heartwarming to see that engagement and to see hopefully some movement in the counties where we're most concerned about what's happening in education, some changes that will occur with this election.
So correct me if I'm misunderstood. Did you say that there's a leader of your school board in your district that was uncontested for a decade?
In my district, District 6 in Wake County, the school board member had been uncontested. The elections were every 2 years and had not faced an opponent until this year, and decided
crazy.
not to run for re-election.
Wow. Teresa, you've been following it a lot too, because of, we're just hearing about the school board races all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it started at the beginning of the year, like as Kelly mentioned, actually before, when the pandemic started, the schools were shut down, but also there was issues about masks being forced on kids. It was Moms for Liberty. There was a story that I did about how, it's okay to have a mask if it's the parent's choice. It's what's the parents, it's their best decision, not listening to the school or to another official tell them what to do. I even did a story now as recently as a few weeks ago about how more parents are sending their children to Catholic schools, private schools, because they want a say in what their children want for their children's education. And I know the General Assembly, the Senate passed a Parents' Bill of Rights earlier in the year. Didn't go to the House floor, but we at John Locke Foundation even did a study on that. Parents definitely want their voices heard, and this is like a under the radar issue that's being actually voted on today.
Kelly, is that what you're hearing from the grassroots?
Yes, it is. Parents are being unheard. Their voices are being disregarded. There's a candidate in Wake County who kind of disregarded what the parent voice in one of his interviews in an editorial labeled the parent voice conspiracy theories, and how he had to constantly combat misinformation coming from parents. And so for 2 years, when we've been so concerned about what we're seeing with our students. We want there to be constructive conversations going on with our school board leaders, and when we're dismissed and when our choices are being taken away from us, like Teresa mentioned, and the decisions that we like to be a part of with our children, and some of the schools are overstepping the bounds and infringing on the parent voice, it's concerning, and we need to see change in some of these races.
Kelly, what was an aha moment kind of for you when you started getting involved in these issues? I imagine it came during the pandemic, but what was like a big central turning point in this whole, of course we saw the race in Virginia and the elections there, but what was for you, what was the turning point in North Carolina where you knew something was drastically changing?
As far as the COVID or the parent engagement?
Just both. I mean, I think COVID probably played a role in that parent engagement.
I had never been involved in any of the politics of the school board. My political values really hadn't been shaped before COVID, and they certainly have really I've come into my own in my political beliefs and my values due to all of this. And part of it was the summer of 2020, watching the school board make plans that were no plans. And then when it was time for school to start and the dates to reopen were postponed, and then finally getting to have conversations with parents and hear that I was not the only one who felt as strongly about my concerns of the lack of a plan to get our children back in classrooms, and really the lack of children-centered decision making. Our children weren't being talked about, and reflecting back, parents and their voices were not taken into consideration from the very beginning.
Sure. Sure. Kelly Mann, our grassroots director, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really glad that you're out there kind of hearing what people are saying, because these school board races are important, and I think that this is a trend that we're going to see for a really long time to come.
Yeah. They are important, and it does inspire me to see all of the parents who are giving so much of themselves for these campaigns, and either running for the school board themselves or working on the campaigns for school board members. So
that's great. Good. Thank you. I appreciate it, Kelly. So we got a little bit of an update. So Teresa, you have an update on the Bo Hines-Wiley Nickel race.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes ago. It looks like Bo Hines is gaining on Wiley Nickel in NC13. Right now it shows Nickel has a little over 91,000 votes, and Hines has got a little over 67,000.
Sure,
so.
and I mean, it's also worth noting that these are early.
Right,
yeah.
There's probably a lot of precincts in Johnson County that haven't reported yet.
Okay,
would be my
yeah,
guess.
so a lot of what we're seeing is early voting, which tends to skew a little bit more Democrat. Democrats embrace the early voting process before Republicans do, although I think this time around we saw it sort of picking up among Republicans. More Republicans were doing it, still outpaced by Democrats. Democrats, even though they were down, their numbers were down a little bit before this weekend, they were still, significantly higher number of early voting among Democrat voters versus GOP. But they called in the troops, I think, this weekend. I think Democrats closed that gap over the weekend with lots of early voting. So we are seeing some totals coming in, but a lot of it, again, is going to be early voting. I think it's interesting. Of course, Dallas is texting. I got the Dallas text update.
Well, what's he saying?
So he's noting that so the judicial races, even though we're seeing a lot of early voting and those returns tend to be more Democrat, the judicial races are still within a point of the U.S. Senate race, which I think is interesting because you're getting, people are probably researching and learning more about these judicial races than they used to in the
and I think there's
past.
probably less ticket splitting too than
right.
maybe there has been in the past. If you follow the last presidential election in North Carolina where Trump won, you had him, even though he was weakened in some sense from his first election, he carried a lot of Republicans in this state, and I think you have to just take that into consideration. He carried, remember the Attorney General race? I mean, no one thought that Josh Stein would lose, and that was a close race. I mean, it was a pretty close race, and he was outspent. I don't know if it was 8, 9, 10 to 1 or whatever it was. And I think you're just seeing less ticket splitting maybe than you've seen in the past.
Right.
Because the parties are so diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
Right.
one of the things that you have a unique role, of course, as opinion editor in Carolina Journal. A lot of us are chasing the story of the week, story of the day, story of the hour, but you get to have a sort of 10,000-foot view of the material coming in, the trends that you're seeing, particularly among maybe more conservative writers that are drawn to some of our work. What are you seeing, and how are people reacting to the cultural shifts that we saw in the election, certainly since the government shutdowns of schools and businesses?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of frustration. I think one of the things you see is a lack of trust of institutions.
Right.
And I think that's an important point, that people in Washington, people who are in institutions, they have to earn that trust. The media has to earn this trust. The media is an important fourth estate in this country, where it's they're a watchdog on politicians. But people don't trust the media anymore, and that's unfortunate, because they play an important role in our society. They play an important role in educating the public and calling out corruption and calling out the malfeasance in the political world. But if people don't trust them, they're going to tune them out. And I think that's why you have not only the frustration, but some of the hyperpoliticization, because you don't have people who trust institutions. They don't trust what they're hearing from in Washington. And when they don't do that, they're not going to trust what they're hearing in Raleigh half the time. And so I think that's just a concern that I think institutions, a lot of times we want to blame the voter or we want to blame the citizens, but I think the institutions have to earn back that trust, Donna.
Sure. I see that a lot too, but I like to see that we're having high turnout.
Yep.
Because it means while they're not happy with our institutions, Congress has a notoriously low approval rating, as does media, of course, but they're still turning out to vote, which I think really says something about where we are as a country, the kind of people that we are. And when you're seeing that at the State House, I'm sure, because it's a relatively thankless job. And let me just say right now, thank you everybody who ran, because this is not an easy thing to do. I mean, you got to drum up money, and it's all for, if you're in the state legislature, it's $13,000 a year.
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
I'm from Pennsylvania originally, and a lot of state senators get paid $90,000 a year.
Wow.
So it's quite a difference. But you say it's a part-time legislature.
Sure.
So yeah, kudos and hats off to all those who do run for the office, because it is a thankless job. But those who, they find that dedication, and, citizens are quite happy with that. But as Ray mentioned, listen to the citizens, read the opinions, people write in, and listen to your constituents, because it is an important, that's what you're working for, the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that supermajority, as you're covering the legislature, what do you think? How close are we to to seeing the Republicans take back a supermajority after tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to call.
Sure, no, of course. But what do they need to do?
I think listening to the people's concerns.
Sure.
Basically, people have felt unheard in the past year and a half.
Right.
As I mentioned before, all the kitchen table issues.
Sure.
And they're, I have the exact figures in front of me, but like losing so much money. I think I read something that Thanksgiving, people are barely going to afford $100 for Thanksgiving dinner this year.
Wow.
So I mean, just listen to your constituents,
Yeah.
and I think they are. I think the Republicans are listening to it. I think there's a very good shot of having the supermajority. But I think that's and I think we're on the right track.
So in the Senate, Republicans have 28 seats. They need to add 2 more to get a veto-proof majority. So we'll be watching those very, very closely. And in the House, Republicans have 69 seats right there. They need to pick up 3 to get back to that supermajority of 72. But Democrats have been very, very adamant about trying to keep that supermajority from happening. It's been a big part of their ad campaign. It's been a big part of their door knocking. That they have really focused on abortion as an issue.
Yep.
Right.
And they have said, look, you have to keep a supermajority from happening, because then Governor Cooper will still be able to veto whatever Republican majority might get through. Do you think that has resonated with people?
Well, I think it is. They see the judicial activism, right? I think there's a lot of voters that probably want to empower Republicans in not just the judicial races, but in the legislature. And we're gonna have Jim come in and talk about all the money that's poured into.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Bloomberg that put in a ton of money for gun control, just trying to save Democrats. So you got a lot of money pour into this state in the last basically month of this election to try to protect that Democrat supermajority. It was probably moved from other areas where they felt less confident.
Right.
So that's something to watch in terms of, were some of these Republicans that were outspent, were they able to overcome that hurdle?
Sure, and you have an update on one of our congressional races as well.
Yeah, it says here the Associated Press has called U.S. House District 4 for Valerie Foushee. the
Okay, so
Democrat.
House District 4 has been called by the Associated Press for Democrat Valerie Foushee. Not a huge surprise in that one. So if you know that area, I think that's right. It's in the Durham area, I believe, and it's I think pretty. She was doing pretty well there, and I think she was expected to win that. Again, there are not a whole lot of competitive races in our 14 congressional seats this time, 13 with Bohines and Wiley being one of the few, but a few have emerged as being more competitive than we expected. Up there in one with Sandy Smith and Don Davis, a little more competitive than they thought. But again, House District 4 has been called for Valerie Foushee by the Associated Press. So we'll be tracking those throughout the evening here, and you can also go to carolinajournal.com and catch all of them right there. So we'll be, watching a lot of those. We talked a little bit about the Parents' Bill of Rights in that race. So tell me a little bit. Do you think we'll see that pop up again?
I think so. I think so. I think, the Senate really, they passed it and had a really strong lead with that. Even Democrats this past year, they had their own type. They're kind of associating that with President Biden's Build Back Better, what they had. But I really think the House is going to pick that up. House Speaker Tim Moore said there weren't enough votes back then, but I think if they gain more seats now, I think that you will see that coming back.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and some of these issues that we've seen, inflation, cost of living, and all of those other things, they're all, it seemed like some of the Democrats did not pivot when they saw some of the polling about how important inflation was. So, Ralph, I'm going to show you what I'm seeing on the State Board of Elections website. Certainly, folks, you can go on to ncsbe.gov, and you can see this. Again, it's a lot of early voting. You can also see all the tabs I have open there at the top. We've been doing a lot of research here. So these are some of the early results that we have right now. Sherry Beasley still leading Ted Budd. 53% to 44%, 44.49, and Shannon Bray coming in with 1%, Matthew Ho 0.6. Again, this is a lot of the early voting for more urban areas. Don Davis is leading Sandy Smith 60% to 39, and then we have Deborah Ross leading Christine, Villaverde.
Yeah.
She is 70%. She's pretty strong on that one. And then Greg Murphy leading Barbara Gaskins there in District 3. And of course, District 4, Valerie Foushee. That race has already been called. She's got 77%, and Foushee will replace retiring Congressman David Price, a Democrat. So that race was pretty solidly for Democrats there. Valerie Foushee replacing David Price. So an early night for those two campaigns.
Yeah.
We'll be sticking right here throughout, and then that's interesting.
That's not a surprise. Florida, Ron DeSantis won re-election.
Right, so
it's official.
That's a big race that a lot of us are watching outside of North Carolina.
Yep.
Ron DeSantis has officially won his re-election for governor, and of course, the big question is he going to run in 2024?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. I mean, if he stacks up a huge victory in Florida, which is looking like that's the case, obviously, if they called it this early, then he's going to be, I think, a considerable candidate for president. And of course, you have that rivalry now a little bit that's emerging with Donald Trump. They used to be very close, and that's going to be a big campaign. And so I expect DeSantis to be aggressive in the manner of Trump is. And so you've got two kind of alpha males out there
that'll be interesting.
battling. So it'll be fun to watch.
It's gonna be good TV.
If politics disillusions you, at least it's entertaining, because I think that'll create some entertainment and some drama.
I'd like to see Nikki Haley show up somewhere.
I
don't know where exactly and what role, but I would like to see her
a
show
strong
somewhere, because she's a good candidate,
Yep.
and I think that she would have a good following. Another one, Virginia Fox over in District 5. Virginia Fox leading Kyle Parrish. Now, one of the things that we're watching Virginia Fox, because if she ends up, if Republicans take the House back, Virginia Fox, North Carolina's Virginia Fox, could very well land there as chairman of education. Right now we have Bob Lupke, who's joining us. He is our resident expert on everything education policy at the John Locke Foundation. Virginia Fox, she's quite an advocate for parents and students there on Capitol Hill. What do you think about her stepping into a chairman role if Republicans take the House?
Well, she's been in that role before, Donna, and she's been very, very active in pushing for a lot of issues and a lot of policies that we support here. So I'd welcome the change, and I'm sure she'd do well in it.
Very interesting. Well, tell me what you've been watching throughout this election cycle, because we're in the day-to-day, but you're really in that deep dive about what parents are saying, what the Bill of Rights issues that we've been talking about in North Carolina that were vetoed. Tell me what you're seeing and what you think will come out of this election.
Well, Donna, you know that parents have been in the forefront of this election, for the last, actually 2 years, even with COVID. It's impacted everything, and parents especially their whole lives have been upended by COVID, and also, even more so, the overbearing response that many states and localities have had towards the pandemic, and that schools have been shut down. There's been shifts to virtual learning. Schedules have been upended, and now parents have seen that the last 2 years, with the recent result of test scores being released, that not a lot of learning's been going on. So parents have looked around for other educational options. That has really resulted in a great push for school choice. 2021, 2022. Great years for school choice, and we hope that push continues.
Sure. Well, while we were chatting with Bob here, another race has been called. The Associated Press has called Deborah Ross the victor there in her congressional district 2. So Deborah Ross, of course, was ahead by like 70%, and I think that was a pretty safe seat for her. So it's already been called. Bob, I've been watching a lot. My kids were in a state public school when the state government shut it down. She was at home for a year and a half, and the learning loss was just tremendous, and it's not easy. Parents are really engaged, and maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing as we move forward. Is there any way back for some of these kids? What do we need to do at the state level to get them back in business?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of people are asking themselves that right now, and as you know, I think what we ought to remember is there's been a lot of money pushed to the state, to local districts, to actually deal with that over the last 2 years. And I've written a lot about that, and I just checked before coming on that approximately about 45% of that money, North Carolina got $6.2 billion in COVID relief.
Wow.
But 45% of that has not been spent yet. So we have an obligation to our kids and also to our local communities to make sure that money is spent wisely. If you look at a lot of the research on learning loss, there's been a consensus that intensive tutoring is really the way to redress this. As you know, a lot of the kids that in the past that were challenged academically, at-risk kids and that, they've kind of suffered the brunt of the real challenge that COVID presented. The achievement gaps between various groups have widened and so forth. So it's really our responsibility to make sure that we bring those kids back. And unfortunately, right now, not a lot of schools, not a lot of school districts are spending that money wisely.
Bob, where's the disagreement about where that money should go? I mean, if someone's watching this and they're saying, well, why can't they just spend the money? Why can't they invest it in my kids? Where's the actual disagreement on this issue?
Well, that's a good question, Ray. If you look at, you can actually go on the North Carolina Department of Public School Instruction website and see how the money is being spent by local districts. Unfortunately, the majority of it is going for salaries and benefits in most districts. Teachers are getting pay raises. They're hiring additional teachers and staff. Not a lot of money is making its way into the classroom, and parents need to know that, and they should be upset about it. They have a right to make sure that this money's getting in the classroom. By law, 20% of it has to be spent on learning loss, and unfortunately, I don't think that's the case.
I mean, we got to ask you about Leandro, because, you know, this is a decision that just came from the North Carolina Supreme Court, you know, days before this election. And right now it looks like, you know, of course, again, we're getting the early voting from mostly urban areas. Lucy Inman, Democrat, leading Richard Dietz for the high court right now, 53-46. Sam Ervin also 53-46. So it tells me that, you know, people are voting straight ticket. Nobody's splitting those two seats on the North Carolina Supreme Court. What does Leandro mean to this process? This is a very big question. We could do an entire live stream just on this. But, you know, can the court order the state treasury, the controller, to open the coffers and fund something beyond